Jace, do you want to do the intro thingy or we didn't talk about
Sorry, you can.
Okay. Welcome everyone to its Copperhead season number 3. We have our readers Matt Hart and Isaac Pickell. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're gonna get started in, let's give it another like 2 minutes. What do you think, Jace? Does that sound good? Just to make sure everybody who wants to be in here can hop in here. Um, while we sort of sit here nicely and wait, our favorite thing is when we like to begin the reading series with a snake story, like a brief story or anecdote about a snake, preferably a copperhead, but any snake will do. So if there are any audience members out there who want to share a snake story, start thinking about that because it's the most magical thing is when someone from the audience wants to share one. Otherwise, I will tell you a snake story. Um, so just think about that. We're going to give it like 1.5, 2 minutes to make sure everybody gets to hop in. But thank you so much for being here on this Saturday evening. I feel like we should have snake music. Matt, can your band write a snake song for us to use?
Sure. Yeah, that would
Cool.
be amazing. I would love to do that.
Future.
All right. Done.
It can become the official It's Copperhead season theme song.
That
Yeah, and
one.
our long list of things to do, we had yet to put show theme song, but now it's on the to-do list officially.
Nice.
Getting things done. We'll give it just like another minute. Okay. Um, does anyone in our lovely audience want to tell a story about a snake? You can do the raise your hand thing, or you can say me in the chat or something. Give it a couple seconds, otherwise I'll just tell one. Where is JP Simmer when you need them? Okay, I'm gonna tell you a story. I have a lot of dreams about snakes. I'll tell you one of the less spooky ones. Um, I had a dream, this would have been like probably last summer, that I was in sort of a big, when you get in one of those dreams or in a big, unfamiliar, dilapidated house and it's sort of like a maze and you can't get out of it. I was having one of those dreams and I was in some sort of like smallish bedroom, and a very short, green, like iridescent green snake bit me on the heel, on the right heel. And then I had a friend in this dream who is my friend in real life, but who was also in the house, who was in a bathroom somewhere at the same time that I was being bit by a snake. That person was also being bit by a snake. And I was like, what kind of snake did you get bit by? And he said he got bit by a copper mouth. So I don't know if he meant a copperhead or a cotton mouth. Um, and we never found that snake. So mystery. It's always going to be a mystery. Um, that's a snake story. Um, so we're going to get started here with our reading. First off, my co-curator, Jace Britton, is going to, so Jace and Isaac are going to do something collaboratively for you. So we're going to go ahead and Jace is going to read Matt's bio, and then I will read Isaac's bio, and then we'll get right into it. And then at the end, when they're finished with the performance, there may be some time to ask questions if you have them. So I will turn it over to Jace.
And Danica, if it's okay, I'm gonna rewind like 15 seconds and say for one, Matt Hart and Isaac are the collaborators. I'm just here. And also, you know, for those of you that aren't familiar, I thought maybe we could say a little bit about what Copperhead season has been so far. It started as we wanted to have this series where the writers could kind of get together beforehand and dictate their own terms as to what collaboration means and figure out something to do. And so I think we also want to say that if anyone is interested in participating in something like this and being sort of set up on a sort of poetic collaboration blind adventure, you know, drop us a line, either Danica or I, and we can figure something out like that out. For today, I'm just excited to see what comes of Isaac and Matt's collaboration. Truthfully, Danica and I don't know, so I'm excited too. So I'll introduce Matt. Matt Hart is the author of 10 books of poetry, including most recently Familiar from Pickpocket Books in 2022, Everything Breaking / For Good from YesYes Books in 2019, and The Obliterations from Pickpocket Books in 2019. Additionally, his poems, reviews, and essays have appeared or are forthcoming in numerous print and online journals, including American Poetry Review, Big Bell, Conduit, Jubilat, Kenyon Review, Poetry, and Lungfull, among others. His awards include a Pushcart Prize, a grant from the Shifting Foundation, and fellowships from both the Bread Loaf Writers Conference and the Warren Wilson College MFA program for writers. He was a co-founder and editor-in-chief of Forklift, Ohio, a journal of poetry, cooking, and light industrial safety MFA. Oh, wait, sorry. I thought that kept going. So Forklift, Ohio, for those of you that knew and loved it, was a journal of cooking, poetry, cooking, and light industrial safety from 1993 to 2019. A faculty mentor in the PNCA Willamette University Low-Residency MFA program and the head of creative writing at the Art Academy of Cincinnati. He's also been a visiting writer professor at both the Vermont Studio Center and the University of Texas at Austin. Hart is also a musician whose music has appeared on MTV and in major motion pictures, including in Kevin Smith's Mallrats. Currently, he plays in the post-punk indie rock bands TRAVEL and NEVERNEW, and edits the journal Solid State. And I think Danica is going to introduce Isaac, and then we'll let what happens happen.
I've been friends with Matt a long time, and I did not know I didn't read your bio all the way, and I did not know that Mallrats fact. That's very exciting. Okay. Isaac Pickell. Isaac Pickell is a Black and Jewish poet, PhD candidate, and adjunct instructor in Detroit. He is a Cave Canem fellow and the author of 2 collections of poetry. It's Not Over Once You Figure It Out from Black Ocean just last fall, 2023, and Everything Saved Will Be Last, Black Lawrence Press, 2021. Isaac's taken a seat in all 50 states and has so much to look forward to. Thank you all so much. I'm very excited for this collaboration. And here we go.
All right. Hello. Can everyone hear me?
Hello, everybody.
All right.
Should we say something about what we did?
I think we probably should. Yeah. I'm not sure we know what we did, but we'll see if we can talk about it anyway.
So it started on a dark, stormy night. Matt and I sent each other kind of obscenely large packets of poetry to start, like 50 pages of poems each. And then we sort of combed through for work that like immediately spoke to us in some way, that made us want to write. And that was sort of the beginning of the process.
Yeah. And then once we chose a poem that made us want to write, we actually wrote something in response to that poem. And then we sent the response to the other writer, and the other writer responded to the response. And so what we have for you tonight are several sets of these calls for a response that
Yeah.
receive themselves another call and another response. And maybe we can talk a little bit about the process of how we made some of these when we get around to that. But I think I'll just get started.
Sweet.
How's that?
Yeah.
All right. Also, if anybody has questions at any point, feel free to jump in the chat or whatever. And I guess at the end, we'll have some time for questions. Is that right, Danica and Jace? Yeah, cool.
Questions or complaints. We also welcome complaints.
We do welcome complaints, mostly complaints. All right. So this is the first poem that Isaac chose. It's called Hello, Matt Hart. Hello, Matt Hart is a quote from a book, and hello, interior of the sun is also a quote from a book by the same author, but the books are very different. It's good to be different. Sometimes I get it confused, the author and the other, and whether I'm Matt Hart or a burning fusion reactor feeling the lightly falling snow on my cheek or the weight of young cherry trees secured against hairs. I am indifferent to the cherry trees and hairs, but not to the invisible world. Hello, ancient shroud, and hello, Andre Breton, since I didn't say it before, but there you were and are. Your flagrant heart, a bitter cuckoo for God. And speaking of God, hello, Taylor Dawson. I'm sure you'll appreciate my angelic horde, even now, stealing 1,000 bicycles and launching themselves with their fiery swords, forged in the crucible that is my Holy Spirit, again and again against the wall of the New Yorker. Actually, I've never submitted poems to the New Yorker. It isn't my reader, you are, and by you, I mean everybody else, but mostly Taylor Dawson and my dead friend and a few other living ones. Hello, Dobby Gibson. In the next line, erudite rhymes with meteorite, and these are my own words rather than the more typical ghost-written ones that beg the question of authenticity without any irritable reaching after fact or reason. Hello, John Keats, in your uncertainties, mysteries, doubts. I have 2 cases of diabolical IPA in the fridge, so chances are good I won't remember saying hello to you tomorrow, and when I open this document, it will be a great surprise. Hello, Dean Young, in your amazing suit of ashes. What haunts every greeting is eventually goodbye.
Which I think everyone can see why I chose it pretty clearly. What a poem. All right, my response is after Matt Hart. It is cleverly enough titled Hello, Matt Hart. It took a bit of a swerve from the original, but this was written while bombing down the highway. I was in the passenger seat, I should note.
Thank goodness.
Yes, it would be dangerous otherwise. So this is a poem about that. Hello, Matt Hart. Books cohere to one another inside the nuclear fusion reactors in Monroe, Michigan, miles down I-75 from downtown Detroit, but not so many miles. Books we've read and those we haven't are bound together within the intimacy of the cores, where repetition becomes an energy source and snow falls less seasonably than it used to. It's 70 degrees and it's February. The ancient shroud lives in the past tense. Hello, 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 hello. Even Andre Breton couldn't predict the crucibles we are becoming in this heat. Little isolated iterations of disaster to which we say, isn't it such a very nice day? We say things like this a lot, name-dropping calamities and making light with their insides. The energy of every book we've ever read, wrought from every tree we've ever rent, could fit inside the reactor's great big cooling tanks. which offer nothing so much as irrational fear. Matt Hart, do you feel it? Are your goodbyes so dreadful you elide greeting?
I do feel it. This is called Just as Cleverly. Hello, Isaac Pickell. After Isaac Pickell. Books cohere to one another inside the fusion. Feel it. Are your goodbyes so dreadful you elide greeting the swaggering sunlight in Tip City? Miles up I-75, repetition becomes an energy source and snow falls from downtown Cincinnati, but not so many days, and it's March. The ancient shroud lives in the past. Books we've read and those we haven't are bound of disaster, to which we say, isn't it such a very nice day, together within the intimacy of the cores, where even Andre Breton couldn't predict the crucibles making light with their insides. The energy of every tense. Hello, 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 less seasonably than it used to. It's 70 degrees. We say things like this a lot, name-dropping calamities. Rent could fit inside the great big cooling tanks, which offer nothing so much as irrational fear. Isaac Pickell, do you ever read what's wrought from every tree we've ever become? Little isolated iterations, or this heat book. So maybe you can kind of see how this went. I've been doing these things for a long time that I call obliterations, and Isaac was really kind to jump on board and go with that term, because they're not translations and they're not mistranslations exactly. They're sort of deliberate reversionings of whatever I happen to be sort of encountering. So yeah, so we have 5 sets of these. So that was the first set.
Yeah, I wonder if we think we have enough work to fill the time? Maybe. We can always kick back another 2, but we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that was our first set. Our second set started with one of my poems called We Are Each a Tiny Gravity that Matt picked out. And it was interesting watching the poems appear on the Google Docs. We just had a shared Google Doc. And Matt is a much better obliterator than I am, we'll say. He had this ability to take what I had written and like reprocess it like it was meat growing through a sausage machine. And like it was recognizable out the other end, but only just barely, which was really, really cool. I struggled with the process a little bit, but sometimes I like what came out. So in this set, you'll see again the way he processes my work in really fantastic ways. But I'm going to read my original first, and then he'll read his response, and then I'll read my response to his response. I'm going to drink water first, though. I swallowed a bug earlier today, and it's still in my throat. It's really I don't know what to do, and now all of you have to know that now, so you can hear it. We are each a tiny gravity. Sometimes I get this unbearable urge to kiss all the worst people, like my father-in-law or the bagger at Trader Joe's, just to know one thing, to lure the edges between us into existence. Whenever I get on a streak of withering choices, my therapist tells me, try doing the right thing, even if you don't want to do the right thing, as an experiment, just to see how it goes, to exist as a cloud of witness. There's no limit to what people will do when no one is looking. from the terrible to the so good. And every diagnosis makes us special. What's wrong with me is that I know what the right thing is. I read, disorder has no origin, just a vanishing point, receding. But I keep looking down the lines. Despite what I see, I still think I'm beautiful, even as I enter the world, bent as anyone into the bar-coded horizon, where we are each a tiny gravity drawing others onto our shopping lists, doodling around the edges like an old cartographer, inventing the borders and playing pretend instead of seeing what's really there. What's wrong with me is that I can't tell where you end and I begin. But this isn't a love poem, and you are everyone I've ever met. I start scribbling before your name, before I even know your name. Special. What's wrong with me is that I know how that story ends.
Yeah, I love that poem. I especially love when you say what's wrong with me, like a poem that acknowledges sort of what's wrong with the speaker. There's something about that that I really love. And also this is the sort of title poem of the manuscript that Isaac sent me to begin this collaboration. I also love the idea of each of us as a tiny gravity. I mean, you know, there's a quotation from Kenneth Koch where he says something about trying to sort of undermine the gravity of our existence. And I always think about the grave and gravity, and I don't know, there's this sort of, black hole at the center of life.
Yes, there really is, and it's always pulling.
Yeah. Yeah. So my response is called Gravity's Double Rainbow, obliterated from the Pickell. Often I am compelled by my own limits to spit into the ruins as a form of resistance. And by spit, I mean speak. And by ruins, I mean carnations. And by resistance, I mean now it's just you and me kissing into existence 2 or 3 extra moons to go with the one we already have. My therapist tells me that imagination is one thing, but delusion is something else entirely. And my ideation tends toward the latter rather than the former when I look at the sky and reconfigure it falling to sit in judgment on my chest, which is like a paperweight weighing down a lightning bug by the wing. So it just keeps flickering in an SOS pattern, hoping to be seen. But instead, someone comes along with another paperweight for the other wing to make it symmetrical. There, that's better. So far, so good. I'm aware that moral rightness is a value to most people, at least in a categorical sense. But in the contextual sense, it's a lot more complicated and sometimes involves weighing the consequences of one tragic outcome over another. Very rarely are things absolute, so I am never righteous except about not being righteous, which makes me difficult and skeptical that premises ever lead to conclusions in any sort of binding way that covers all people at all times, or just me and you right here and now in the moment. Nevertheless, this is a love poem because I love you, absolutely. And that goes double for all of you. Clearly, in my own mind, I mean that as inclusively as possible, though I can imagine you feeling excluded, or me excluding myself, or both of us pissing in multiple colors, staged to make it look like something more than a performance.
Wow. Thank you for that processing of my poem. Really makes it feel like something special. I responded in turn with something very different. But I was in the tone of moral righteousness. It's got a walking title, so I'll read the title when I'm ready to read the poem. Yeah, I think that's all I got to say. The atmosphere weighs over 5 quadrillion tons, and still you doubt you can float. A caress can launch a moon into orbit, is a metaphor and a promise that silence can move stones, that no wound is too heavy. Wordlessly, we repair with guilt. Sullen and almost invisible, the air between us weighs one tragic outcome over another until they are symmetrical, until moral rightness fails to vanish into categorical sense. Nothing this clear is absolute. The vanity of apology, the futility of regret. You wait for the best of the wrong answers. The atmosphere is 1/1,000,000th of the Earth's maths. Some things are very little and very much at the same time.
Man, I think you're a lot better at this than you thought you were, because I mean, one of the things that happened actually when we started this process, we sent these sort of manuscripts to each other, and Isaac like immediately responded to like 5 poems with new poems in like 2 days, and I was like completely overwhelmed. And I loved it, but also I felt like you had this amazing ability to like really zero in on what was at the heart of the poem and then find a way to like move that around in your own voice, in your own way. I mean, there's kind of a philosophical wrestling match going on in all of these sets, you know, and I you know, I feel like someday I want to be able to like sit down with Isaac in person so that we can like actually go back and forth and talk about or try to articulate what that philosophical wrestling match is exactly, because it's in poetry and there's, you know, we're trafficking in ambiguity in a lot of ways. There's it's sort of difficult to pin down exactly what that wrestling match is about, but this is like such a fun experience to be able to do this with you. I actually hope that we get to keep doing it.
Yeah, it's worth noting that we have like 11 of these, I think, and we're giving you 5 because of time constraints, but we created a lot of work, full sets.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a project. It's a whole project. So it's a lot of words.
Yeah.
And Molly had asked a question. Do you want to answer the question before we?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We did read each other's obliterations before tonight. We've been sharing the same document, so we've been playing in the same pool. These are obviously, it's the first time we're hearing them out loud together, but we have read each other's pieces before.
Yeah, but it's really different to hear them out loud, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
Wow.
All right, shall we move on to nightingales?
Yeah, let's do it. So the next poem that Isaac chose of mine was a poem that's called Ode to a Nightingale, which is both an ode to a nightingale by John Keats and also The Nightingale by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And my mentor Dean Young was living in Cincinnati for the last 9 months of his life, and we were writing poems back and forth every day. And we were both really interested in surrealism and romanticism, and we were going back and forth about the romantics. And at one point, I think Dean said, you need to, write the new Ode to a Nightingale or something. I mean, I don't remember exactly what it was. And in my hubris, I thought that I could try to do that somehow. So I wrote this poem, and thankfully, Isaac just like crushes this in his response. So, Ode to a Nightingale. No more factory settings. Weston's on his easterly way. The sun bombs, but dimly perceptive on its brink walk, straining at particles of daring every darkness. I am not afraid today, which is lucky, and neither am I foaming at the mouth out of ink. Affirmatively, I affirm what survives me. To learn the lyrics and to be unhinged. To feed back the rhinoceros before there aren't any rhinoceros. Or no, strike the rhinoceros, not the real ones, just the written ones here. I want to remember the sea snails in my dreams that weren't in the sea, but in my workspace slugging along, white, blue, and green, leaving a wake of pink powdered milk, and also the witch with the growls behind the door who was under the stairs in my childhood home. How I taunted her to open and let me be cursed, straining at particles of daring every darkness. See, I'll even quote myself, paraphrasing someone else. It's that easy, sort of day, in what vibrates profusely, the maples and the elms and the passerine chipmunks, the church bells, the breweries, the sacredly profane. I am profligate in my desire to collide with a World Series or a satellite of sequins or a red carpet monster. It sounds like a mess, but it's completely messianic. I go into the oranges, energetically galactic, and lift up my heart to determine what sings. Then I eat a nightingale right off the tree. How wide-eyed does one need to be serious? Do I wake or sleep?
So the imagery there just grabbed me in 20 different directions. And this was sort of, I think this might have been the second poem that I responded to. And it really pulled me in right from the start. And all I could think in the darkness was sort of to process what's happening with language around what's happening in Gaza. And so this poem, in my response, sort of turns into a thought about what darkness or a lack of light, which is cast by maybe mainstream media's use of language and of framing, is doing to this conflict, and how it is impacting the ability to know what's really going on. This is, I'll plug it, in Matt Hart's journal Solid State issue 2, which is a really cool journal that's soldered together, which you do not see every day, though it is a cut risk, so be careful with it if you order a copy. All right, I'm going to read Ode to a Nightingale after Matt Hart. These first 3 lines, I'm not apoplectic, they just have exclamation points, so that's where we're starting. No more factory settings where we align to the norm. What survives us will be everything. So we must watch what we say. Songbird, songbird, sing me clear of the darkness. Language shrouds us in with its reprises, its patterns to outlive us all. We accede to words like we didn't make them up for ourselves, like our compliance is only natural. Gazans are 20 times less likely to be described as massacred, 40 times less likely to be described as slaughtered, all the while surviving on just the chaff of altruism, food dropped into the sea. Daring every darkness, the sacredly profane define for us who gets to be a grandfather and who a statistic, who gets to be a daughter and who a statistic, who gets to use the thesaurus even in death. Songbird, songbird, sing me clear of the complicity I can't run away from by using all these words and none of them. The sun bombs, and yet democracy hangs on in this shade, hangs on, hangs on. Democracy thrives in this dim slurry, vibrating profusely, yearning to be nothing more than a tune we've heard before, a tune that those whose power will survive us already know by heart. Your song is so pretty, so pretty, so pretty, so pretty.
That poem is just amazing. I mean, when I read that response and I was like, I mean, it is, you know, it's everything that you said it is, and also like one of the most wonderful and trenchant critiques of romanticism that I've ever heard. I mean, it's really incredible. My response is not quite that elegant. Nightingale alternate endings after Isaac Pickell, Dean Young, Herman Melville, and Mary Shelley. And you know, the end of Ode to a Nightingale, most of you probably know, right, is Do I Wake or Sleep, which is the end of my poem. So here are Nightingale alternate endings. New tactics, broke narratives, rocks, mostly molten, a few microorganisms, Peehee's giblets. Do I covet my neighbor's ass or do I steal a Pepsi? Do I shallow or do I deep? Your song is so pretty, so pretty, so pretty. Fucking bird, fucking widget, fucking witch crotch of tree. Then the difference between imagined and imaginary. Don't sing anything ever is one way. Don't buy a gun on your birthday is another. What is it that praise wisely, I suppose, at least in the sense that it will live to see tomorrow? The last part is bracketed. The last part's erased. How to disassemble what's oft been assembled so naturally / unnaturally by man to make it smother. I'm sorry I said man there. I would have said humankind, but man sounded better. If I tear off a wing, will it still be an ode? If I tear off the other, will I set myself on fire? Cough more, talk less. Hark, dumbass, someone said. Someone much smarter than I am by many threads. I don't feel well after taking my meds. I don't feel well after taking and taking. Oh, small bird dreaming 200 years, soon borne away in the darkness and distance. Are you then so easily turned from your design? Do I glitch or spit a spot? Complain too much? The sticking point is always a two-state solution. Do I sleep or wake?
All right, we got The Resistance. This is a fun one.
Oh, right, this is mine.
This is you, yeah.
Yeah, we haven't talked about this, but so this poem, The Resistance, actually is an obliteration of a John Ashbery poem in Planisphere. And I don't have the poem in front of me right now, and I don't remember, but I remember reading this John Ashbery poem, and it does a similar kind of thing. It's not about poetry at all as this is. But also I've been having this ongoing aesthetic battle with my friend, the poet Mark Halliday. And Mark is brilliant, but also has a really very particular notion of what a poem is and what a poem can be and what it can't be. And so I'm doing some battle with Mark Halliday here, in the most friendly way possible. But also there's a place where this poem wound up kind of surprising me in a certain way, and I'm glad that Isaac picked it, to resist. The Resistance. It happens one Monday in Westwood is a poem. A fly-covered jelly-filled chipmunk is a poem. Americans by American in Mexico City is a poem. Pork chops and sour cream is a poem. It's never for me to decide it is a poem. Crushing a can on my forehead is a poem. Eternal and serious, a drawer full of socks is a poem. John Keats brushing his teeth with a thistle is a poem. I feel like you're making some fun at my expense is a poem. Genetically modified corn in the sky is a poem. Breast milk galactic, if anything is a poem. A crack in the foundation lets the rain trickle in is a poem. Suddenly, the lines on the chalkboard become blurry. Customers bagging their groceries to be helpful to a bird with its shadow breaking over me, the terrible words and the sweat is a poem. Unfortunately, it's cancer or worse is a poem. I'm not talking to my mother anymore is a poem. A beach ball thrown at a frisbee is a poem. Rowboat for sale by owner, please call is a poem. Consistently inconsistent, as everyone knows, is a poem. Even a beauty pageant of urologists is a poem, but it's also important to know that right at this moment, I'm sitting in a soft deck chair, watching a hummingbird feeder swaying in the wind and thinking again about how useless thinking is a poem. Asparagus, black bears, cornhole, a snow globe, the resistance I feel from others to being myself is a poem. Grandma doesn't remember who anyone is a poem. The rip in the crotch of my jeans is a poem. Somebody get me a beer is a poem. Are you somebody lonely like I am is a poem. Hydrangea blossom drooping its head.
The music and insistence of that poem always gets me. I responded and tried to do it justice with The Resistance after Matt Hart. My grandparents have all been dead for quite some time, and sometimes I forget to mourn this fact, or the one that reminds me my parents will soon join them. They are 75 this year. Sometimes this makes me wonder whether I'll have anything left to give once there's no one left for me. I forget my chosen family too easily is a poem. Endless images stacked one on top of the other An infinite well of infinite wells is a poem. Eyes closed to constraints, like what others think of us, is no longer our limit case. The thing is, everything is for sale. American and otherwise is a poem. Are all of us just triangulating who we are based on the echoes of who we were supposed to be? I think a lot about how to resist systems, and sometimes this makes me wonder whether I have anything left to give, since there's nothing left for me. Maybe that is the ticket. It's never too late to invest in the evil empire is a poem. I want to push back, push back. I want to stand tall. The resistance isn't the resistance we think it is a poem. The resistance isn't the resistance we think it is a poem. The resistance isn't the resistance we think it is a poem.
That's so dynamite, man. Can you imagine like how things could be transformed if like everybody had shelter and food and healthcare? I mean,
it's so easy that it's impossible.
yeah. This is called Recalcitrant Resistor after Isaac Pickell. My resistances have all been resistant for quite some time, and sometimes I forget to resist this fact, or the one that reminds me my other resistances will soon join the resistance. Sometimes this makes me wonder whether I'll have any resistance left to give once there's no resistance left for me. I forget my chosen resistances too easily is a resistance in the wrong direction. Endless resistances, stacked one on top of the other, an infinite resistance of infinite resistances is a resistance. Eyes closed to resistances, like what others think of us, is no longer our resistance limit. The thing is, everything is for sale is a resistance, again in the wrong direction. American and otherwise is a resistance. My certainty about what's right and what's wrong is a resistance to all contrary evidence. Are all of us just triangulating who to resist based on the echoes of who we've been programmed to resist? I think a lot about how to resist systems, and sometimes this makes me wonder whether I have anything left to resist since there's nothing left to resist me. Also, I have no weapons. Maybe that is my resistance. It's never too late to advertise more resistance as a resistance. I want to push back, push back. I want to stand tall. But the resistance isn't the resistance we think it is a recalcitrance. The resistance isn't the recalcitrance we think it is a recalcitrance. The recalcitrance isn't the recalcitrance we think it is a resistance. You know, obviously the process of that started with me like replacing every noun in your response with resistance. Which there's a one thing Dean Young said to me at one point was like, you know, this is when I was a student of his many years ago, but he was like, you know, if you're stuck writing poems, just take a poem that you love and like change every noun to gerbil. But in this particular case, like I like the cascading sort of effect of like your response to my original poem and then that response to your poem, and it just like sort of cascades out of control. And you know, it's a sort of reminder that words, especially words that can be overused, right, in a way that their meaning gets sort of sapped from them. And so like the the resistance by the end is just music.
Yep.
And wow, that's kind of terrifying.
Everything can get aestheticized if it makes someone money.
Yeah.
Or in our case, if it doesn't.
Right.
But yeah, I love the echoes at the end of recalcitrance and resistance. It's really nice. That's what we're left with. This is our very last one for today. Again, we had 11 of these, but this is our 5th and final for today. This one gets a little intimate. Matt chose what is a very intimate poem that I wrote. And it sort of cascades through intimacies therein in our responses to each other. My original is called Keepsake. It's for Molly. To know a body isn't to remember a single snapshot of a time you deemed it good enough, but to witness a moving picture, to look at a figure like in a kineograph, flipping through difference to make out the whole, like seeing all 3 million green crowns that make up this world's canopy, all at once in a blur, yet be able to confidently gesture to the soft curve of the forest. There it is, you say, of the forest for the trees. Having watched you, some moments do flicker. Having watched you, some moments do fade. Despite the distraction of time, how I've enjoyed knowing the slow course of your body's evolution. On the eve of losing you, I find myself flipping through 9 years and how you've grown. Your fears for how this form would treat you have recoiled into a childhood-sized coffin as your skin does, something different than it once did, and you yearn to have nothing but more change. What once was dreaded as wilting and wither, you now see as bloom, smile lines and stretch marks you traded for life. A time machine is laughter, a grin for everywhere you've been. In truth, it's been weeks since I've really seen you, and this flip book is all I have. So skimming over the long sweep of our time together has become a habit. I try not to skip ahead to my favorite parts, trying to memorize your body's passage from careful to capable, from foe to friend, from beauty to beauty, looking up the word kineograph because I couldn't think of a better way to say I'd miss you every one of your pages. Of course, to lose someone is more than missing their body, but yours says so much. It says so much. I spent too much time not listening.
That's an amazing poem. I think that I chose that poem because I was responding to the intimacy, and also because you know, you and I had not met at all. We've never met in actual person. We've only seen each other on screen. So, you know, Jason Danica brought us together to do this, and there is something really strange about sending your poems to someone else who you don't really know, to have them obliterated.
Yeah,
not edited, not revised, but completely reconfigured in someone else's mouth. And you know, there is a kind of intimacy to that. This is very different than the intimacy that you're talking about in the poem, but I think it's part of what I was responding to, and why I picked it. So my poem is, and you know, this seems to make sense. It's called "For God's Sake, Your Forgiveness," for Isaac Pickell. I don't know if you'll remember me, but I was the guy sweating profusely and throwing his guitar across the room when you were sitting at one of the tables in the bar where my band was playing, poring over a book of theory that I wouldn't be lucky enough to understand if I could read it. How am I saying that as any kind of gesture, and hopefully a kind one, toward the soft curve of a soft serve ice cream softball forest for the trees is not for me to figure or configure. Go figure. I added a line where there wasn't one before. I'm fathoming a line through the nerve you took the lead. Despite the distraction of teaching and a flood and my work on an archive, my daughter's high school graduation, I've enjoyed reading you, seeing you read, reading me, and this collaboration, which is a jumble in the final days of a new beginning where you are conflated with somebody else like I am always also, but this is your form, and I thank you for its guidebook. My response is more to form than to content, I'm afraid. I'm afraid of what's next. The world seems intractable. Poetry is vague. I don't know how to be, and now I think I've lost my place. And this started as a dream of Alice Notley saying in her kaleidoscopic way, prose is what you say that's approved or condemned, which I guess implies that poetry is mysteries, doubts, and contradictions, neither true nor false, as this is and isn't. I wish I could be funnier and not write into you like running into you again after all this time. In truth, it's been weeks since I've really seen you, and this flip book is all I have. So skimming over the short sweep of our time, obliterated has become a habit. I try not to skip or skip ahead. For God's sake, friend, your forgiveness.
And of course it's given. It's given you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I guess we're closing with one more poem. This one is for Matt Hart. You may have met him. He's one screen below me. And it is about our collaboration, though, of course, everything is conflated, as happens in poetry. It's called Pen Pals and Other Archipelagos for Matt Hart. I don't know how you remember me, defined as we are for each other by distance and the human solace of flight, swooping figures fading out for weeks on end for the necessities of our separate lives, an absence we could learn to call migration. But for now, we're here on the same plane, and we pull at tangled filaments like we could draw them out and know one another and make a bit of nest, like that were possible through nothing but words, when we are all more body than language. We tease out connection in unseen gestures, the way I twirl my hand at the keyboard when I know you've got something I've got to say. As absence is the better part of knowing you, conflation is a certainty, twisting the other through the patterns of more familiar forms like we're always already someone else. I'm left to mend the muddle with vanishing strokes that bleed your waning shape into horizon, how you become everyone I've ever met in order to remain tangible, to keep you as something other than a silhouette retreating, palpable only as the audible footsteps of a sad walker dragging their feet. For all of this, we must be more than hellos and goodbyes. In flight, you tell me 90% of migration is rest, but we're too busy island hopping for all of that, telling stories back and forth the only way we know how. Poetry is neither true nor false, but a habit of curling my wing around what we share. So here we are at the end of our absences, the last of the flock to accept there's a destination that's not each other. We write until they learn to call us by just one name. And that's it. Yeah.
Dynamite. That's such a good poem, man.
Thank you, Matt. Sweet.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. That was completely beautiful.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. So at this point, we've generally just like opened for questions or just conversations or what do you suggest at the beginning, not corrections, complaints? Is that what you said?
Complaints.
Right. So yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to jump in and talk to one or both, now's the time.
Matt, hi. Isaac, hi. That was really weird and pleasant. So thank you both. That was all.
Thank
Not
you. Thank you.
We've got a comment in the sideboard saying complaint is that I can't read all 11 of these sets. Thank you, Dominique.
Wow. Yeah, thank you.
Maybe we should make it a chapbook.
Yeah, maybe we should.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Let's talk about that. I got your address. I think is there hand raised? I think my father has a question. Oh no.
Yeah, this should be very scary for you. Huh? You said exactly what I was going to say. The combination between the two of you is so magical and so intimate and so connected that I thought that a book together in your future would be amazing. And I have a title for you. Dialogue, Interactive Poetry, A Guide to Writing and Wording. That is to say, I loved what you did together. And I think it's magical.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. I do I mean, it was a really weird process, right?
Yeah.
And especially because there was a long gap where, because Isaac responded like right away in this sort of major way, and I was like, whoa, okay, he's like on it, and also is like capable of like churning stuff out like really fast, which I also tend to churn things out really fast. But there was a lot of stuff going on in my life, and like my daughter was graduating from high school, and we had a flood, and the school was ending, and all kinds of stuff, right? And so Isaac responded really fast, and then I responded a little bit, and then there was a big gap of time, and then kind of a flurry of activity at the end, like right at the end in the last like few weeks maybe. But I hope that like I was thinking about it all.
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking about it all the time, and thinking like how sort of, special the opportunity was, and also the fact that like, because I've started collaborative projects with people before, where, it's like you go back and forth like once or twice, and then the other person just falls off, which in this case probably seemed like it was me. But I think, it is a rare and interesting thing when you can send somebody a bunch of poems and then you get a bunch of poems back, like almost immediately, and I do tend to write really fast.
Yep.
But you do also, clearly. And so there's something like really copacetic potentially about the about the back and forth and also maybe about our processes. But it's so weird that we wrote these poems and that we never really had a conversation with each other.
Yeah, it felt like a conversation, right? I think that's
Yeah.
probably the best way to put it, is that at some point, you know, philosophical tussle, sure, but really like a conversation, which good conversations are philosophical tussles. And I think that that's sort of what it developed into once we got into a flow. And Matt, you responded to my responses really quickly. So whenever I would send a response, you would respond from your poem. You would respond to that quickly. And that did start to feel sort of alchemic or magical, the way that, like, yeah, you just throw something into the abyss of an email and then it spits back out work.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. Yeah, I do think there's something copacetic about our processes.
Yeah, and also, you know, it's so different, right, from the way that poems usually go into the world, which is that they go out into the world never to be heard from again.
Yep.
You know, like if you publish something in a journal, like it gets published in a journal and that's fantastic, but you don't know if anyone read it, you don't know if it inspired anyone, you don't know if anything came from it. It just is out in the void, and you know, and so process like this sort of allows us to engage in that, you know, what I think of maybe as kind of an endless game of call and response. And I've said this before, like, you know, I feel like part of being alive and part of being human is to participate in this endless game of call and response, which maybe started with the Big Bang, right, as the first call or something, and then like every cloud of gas, every rock, every fish, every speck of dust that's ever existed has been a response to that call, but each of those things is their own new call. And so there's always like this volley, this back and forth, but it happens so under our radar that we don't realize that that's the sort of game we're playing. And I don't mean game in any sense to diminutively, but like process like this sort of allows you to like really engage in that in a deliberate way and to think about like, oh, here's this call for a response, which is also a call for a response, which is a call for a response, and it never ends.
Yep. Yeah, we could go down rabbit holes with a few of these in particular, that like when your response came back, I wasn't done yet, but our process was done. So
Yeah.
like time to stop then, but like I could keep going.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, I feel like we could, you know, like we could string out the Nightingale thing for a much longer time.
Yep.
I wanted to ask a quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So this is the weird thing about this. So Matt, it's true that you put a poem out in the world usually and there's no response, but you can like imagine that everybody loves it. And you can imagine that it is received exactly how you want it to be received. But there's a real vulnerability in this process. And I'm curious if either of you can speak to like what it felt like to have your like precious baby axed and torn apart and obliterated into something new that may or may not have any sense of what it was supposed to be when it started.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was there definitely was a vulnerability at the beginning. Mostly I think on my end, because Matt and I, despite seemingly having processes that work well together and philosophies about the world, I think that have some resonances, we write pretty different kinds of poems. And so I had no idea what was going to come out, if it was going to be a Matt Hart poem and what that would mean, after seeing his packet. And I think that once it started like knocking into each other and spitting things out, it no longer felt as vulnerable. It felt more like generative, in a way that like it added something to my poem rather than challenging what my poem was. And it helped me sort of, oh, that's what my poem is about, kind of deal, which was fun.
I felt really similar. I mean, I think, I have some really dear good friends, right? Who, if I send them a poem that I wrote, that's 3 pages long, it comes back and it's like 10 lines. And that is sometimes dispiriting in a way that this process never was, because I agree with Isaac that I felt like this was generative the entire time. And hopefully, I mean, it felt, when I would get your responses, I would feel like they were also generous, as well as being generative. And so, it was in addition to, and not a reduction of somehow.
Other questions?
I've got
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Dawn.
you're good. You're lovely. Hi, Matt.
Right.
Hi, Isaac. Nice to meet you. I'm also in Detroit.
Oh, nice.
A question that I kind of had, I know you kind of briefly touched on like sometimes taking the noun and replacing it with a specific word, but what other kind of processes did you go through when you were trying to figure out what you wanted to obliterate versus what you really needed to keep as the original meat of the poem, so it was semi-recognizable, but what you kind of felt like you were called, I guess, to obliterate?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, for me at least, the process is really, I mean, I guess I would call it organic, but I think that there were, I'm also like sort of a process junkie, so I love messing with things to see what will happen. And so, I probably couldn't tell you specifically like what it was in a given poem that called to me that said this needs to be changed in this particular kind of way, but I can tell you that I tried a bunch of different processes. So replacing, all the nouns with resistance, right, is one. But I think both Isaac and I tried erasure at certain points. We also, I also did a lot of like sort of associative, what I call kind of associative translation, which is where I would take like a line of Isaac's and I would say it over and over and over again until I started to think of something else, and then I would write that down. And then once I would have like this sort of associative line, then I would go to the next line and either do the same thing where I would read the line over and over and over again until I thought of something else, and then I would write that down, or I would try to follow the sounds in the first line into the next line and then follow the sounds or do another associative kind of translation. There were also times when I would read a line of Isaac's poem, and then I would like look away and I would like try to retype it, and then I went through the whole poem that way, and obviously I couldn't remember the lines exactly, and so there would be this sort of jumble of stuff, and then I started to like rework and reorganize that, and revise that as a way of making the poem. So I mean, those are some of the processes, but also it was very like, it's just fun. It's like, it's fun to write, right? And I'm sort of sustained by the joy and the disaster of that, right? Like just to see what will happen, and to know that I had like a kind of willing partner in this who was like, all right, we're doing this. Then you're just like sort of free to play and to see what happens. And, I think we both took it. I mean, I definitely took it seriously, and I take Isaac really seriously. Like I take Isaac's poems really seriously. And I think, I wanted to try to somehow like do justice to that, to his really amazing work, So it had to be serious, but it also had to be ridiculous, like at the same time. Like it had to be fun, or it wouldn't have been anything.
Yep. Yeah, a couple of the ones we didn't read, I basically, you can all hear it when you hear Matt's poetry. He has like this flood of language, right? And it's like when you see it on the page, it comes at you and comes at you. And a couple of times what I tried to do for my obliteration was like let myself get completely and utterly drenched in the poem. And then once it dried off, write down whatever was left. So a couple of my obliterations are like 20 words long, where it's just like, this is what's left afterwards. And those were really fun to write because it felt like I was trying to really distill everything Matt was saying, and knowing though that he was going to blow it back up. And that was part of why I did that, was knowing that, and he did, was knowing that I would take this like do an anime hero and make the sun into a tiny ball in my hand. And then Matt would like unleash it again. And those, I think, we didn't end up choosing one of those, but those were actually some of the coolest, I think, how they turned out, because they did have this sort of action. Yeah, good question. Thank you, Dom.
Yeah, I had a question I wanted to ask here. One thing I was noticing across both originals, responses, or everywhere in between, I found I stopped tracking. I like lost sense of like whose poem it was to some extent. And that felt actually related to like these sort of two compulsions, like one to write about the unknowable, the undefinable, but there was also a lot of numbers. There was a lot of like quantifying and accounting, in the same poem that there was a fusion reactor, there was 70 degrees. Right after the line, "Sing me clear of darkness," there was the bit about Gaza and 40 times less likely to be described as slaughtered, this like sort of thesaurus accounting in like news media. So I'm curious just how the two of you might think aloud about sort of what gets presented side by side in the poems, as like on one hand like quantifying, accounting, measuring, and on the other hand sort of undefinable vastness, the weight of the earth in sort of more lyric terms. So the unknowable on one hand and this quantifying impulse on the other hand. How do you think about that in these poems or in each other's work even?
Wow. Thank you.
Amazing.
I mean, I would say that like in terms of Matt's work, that process of being very concrete, very small, and then very big and like intangible happens constantly in his work. So it was something that I noted, and I think I was riffing on a little bit, was the way that like Matt's poetry really like will zoom into these little tiny concrete moments and then like kick you back out to philosophy all at once. And I think, in some ways that pattern of his kind of guided me in my own writing and gave it the shape that it did in my responses, to be these sort of like these concrete things and then these intangible outliers. I don't know if I've done a good job of answering that. It's a really great question, but that's one way to.
Well, and I think that the sort of counterpoint to what you just described in my work, which I think is right, is that in your work there is a lot of there's a lot of music, but there's also a lot of clarity. And in Isaac's poems, Isaac is very often, I feel like, really thinking through something in a clear and serious way. And, you know, pushing at the language to like make that happen. But at the same time, like, there isn't this sort of barrage of like thing to thing to thing to thing to thing, right? The poems are sort of less, you know, constellations than they are like, you know, actual trains of thought where you can like go through those poems. And like there are things that happen in my poems sometimes and I have no idea. Like if you've said, what does that mean? I'd be like, I don't know. But like I feel like with Isaac's poems, you know, there are like there's a sort of clarity there that I find like really compelling and like I wish I was better at, right? And that was guiding me in my responses. And so like I think that pressure from each side like was a big part of like what was helping. But when you talk about like the numbers and like defining things, I mean, I feel like there's this desire for clarity, right? And there's also this desire for this kind of bewilderment or like wildness. And those two things like interacting with each other like produce these poems, at least the responses, right?
Bewilderment is a great word for that I think suffused this process in some ways.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful to hear from both of you. I thought of one question I really liked. I have like quotes from each of you written sort of all over in a mess on this page, but I had a question about measurement that I liked. I think this was from Matt. Do I shallow or do I deep? As a rewriting of the Nightingale line. Like that feels like a question sort of like cogent to this question about sort of measuring unmeasurable whatevers.
Yeah.
Danica, anything you did add in the comments that people should sign up, and I will reiterate that aloud. We've got the next one set later this summer. We'll have Karen Rigby and Lindsay Webb sharing a collaboration. Did we set a date for that? Tuesday?
Yes,
July 9th.
we did. I was gonna pull it up and drop it in the chat.
Okay, great. So that'll be in the chat, but we hope we see everyone here there, and I hope to see some names of attendees in the sign-up sheet too. You know, especially as a way of responding to what we've kind of talked about here today about sort of the call and response and response and response. You know, keep it going. Danica, is there anything we've forgotten to say?
Just thank you, like from the bottom of our hearts, to Matt and Isaac for engaging with one another in such a genuine and generous way, and then sharing that with us. Like I could feel it, and it was like you made my whole day, seriously, just listening to you. We all really do want to see that chapbook and then hear you read from it. But thank you, seriously, that was wonderful. And thank you all for attending as well and being part of this.
And thanks to Dom, to others who asked questions, to Molly, you know, and to Isaac's parents. We love hearing from y'all. And yeah, I'll reiterate, thanks to both Isaac and Matt, and thanks to everyone who came.
Thank you everyone for coming.
Thanks,
that was
everybody.
wonderful.
Isaac, this was a blast. Thank you so much.
Yeah, let's stay in touch.
Yeah, let's definitely stay in touch.
Yeah, when you said, "Oh, I wish we could just keep going," we wrote 11. I was like, you know, Danica and I didn't say like, you know, the collaboration has to stop at this point. Please keep going.
Right on.
All right. Well, good night, everybody. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.